What does somebody really need to be thinking about when it comes to communicating cross culturally, and how does that apply to maybe like what they need to be thinking about even in business?
So I think you bring up a really good point that we are increasingly telling our young people and the new entrants to the workforce, be your authentic self. The problem with that is if someone from China is being authentic and someone from America is being authentic, they're going to authentically argue. They're going to authentically conflict.
Okay.
That's how authentic that's going to go, right? So it's really great to know yourself. And I love the title of this podcast. Introspection is a key part of being able to be cross culturally competent. You need to be able to look at yourself and say, how can I communicate effectively, not just authentically? How can I communicate effectively so that the other person who's receiving my communication can see through their own cultural lens, their own racial, gender, and maybe religious lens, and just work environment lens to understand what I'm trying to accomplish and what we need to accomplish together. And coming from me, that says a lot. I just had a conversation yesterday with somebody who knows me very well, my neighbor. She said, "I've just read your book," which is part of the reason we're talking about. I just wrote a book about this called Crossing the Divide, 20 Lessons to Help You Thrive in Cross-Cultural Environments. And she said, "I remember reading the chapters about China and how much you struggled, and you share the struggle that you had between being your authentic self and naturally going a certain direction, being a hard charging type A blonde American woman in a setting where, frankly, that was counterproductive to play to all of those strengths. What you needed to do was to play to strengths that maybe were a little less visible, things like respect for authority, sort of taking a back seat to the comfort level of the person that you're with, especially a translator or a guide in a new country, and even a country that you have been to before. These are helpful things to think about. I want to give your audience a really tangible example of why this is so important. I just went through a list of all of the maybe top 50 SaaS companies around the world. Obviously, there's a lot of software as a service companies in this country. A lot of them are headquartered in Silicon Valley. Some of them have their second headquarters in Silicon Valley. But a lot of them started or have a lot of employees based outside this country, particularly in Europe and in Asia.
Mhm.
And I think of my 26-year-old cousin, Rachel, who got out of college and immediately went to work for an international survey taking company that is not based in the United States. And whoa, all of a sudden she had to adapt to all of these different ways of communicating. The country from which the people at this country come from communicate very differently from Americans. They certainly speak great English, but they also have a different style with how they manage and how they talk to their employees and how they expect their employees to talk to the customer. So I think especially the entrepreneurs of today that are going into some form of technology, not necessarily the small business, although you're going to see it there too, because you have international travelers, but particularly in the entrepreneurial space, even that you're in, Jake, where you're talking to sound engineers
Mhm.
and technologically savvy people, you're going to have to be in situations where you can talk to one person for this product, another person for that, and then the customer may be miles away, continents away in the end. So this is a skill set that I feel really strongly about. It's not one that I confess I've completely mastered. I'm still working on it, but something that I think we don't teach enough in high school and college, and something that if you don't learn it then, you're going to have to learn it on the job, and that can come with some painful consequences.
I'm a big like advocate of like having some kind of a framework in mind whenever it comes to being successful at mastering some kind of a skill. And I almost feel like this is not, maybe I'm wrong, like because as I'm thinking about cross cultural communication, I have a team, like for instance, I have a team in the Philippines that does
I bet you do.
all my podcast editing. They're such nice people. In fact, yesterday I was having, a kind of a late night conversation with my media editor, and they're very quiet people. They're not, they're super grateful, and it's, but it's like that person is going to be different than if I'm working with somebody from Scotland or Ireland, or, you know what I mean? Some other different,
Yeah.
very different personality types. And, so when it comes to that communication, at least the way that I approach it, and I'd love to hear, like, maybe there's some examples here where you've had some communication, or you've had interactions with people from different countries, and maybe you found some friction. It's like, how did you kind of shift through that friction? And because it's like, for me, it's like I try to be, at least this is the approach I take. I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's just what I do, and it seems to work okay. I haven't had any head bumps. I'm sure I will eventually, especially as I get deeper into it. But I always try to kind of, like, as much as I can, like tap into as much emotional intelligence as possible with that person. It's like really, like, learn their energy and kind of feel them out before I really show that true authentic Jake, that kind of type A, like, it's like, let me kind of pull back a little bit and kind of feel this relationship out. Is that, like, what do you think there? Like,
Yeah,
when
I think
you
that's a part of it, and I think that you're probably already light years ahead of me knowing that, because I'm somebody who's put task in front of relationship for most of my career until I realized that the only way that last 10% of your journey towards success happens is if you have a high EQ and you read people and you adjust in response. I think I've been able to read people, but I haven't always been willing to adjust in response because I didn't want to not be myself. And maybe I thought I had something to prove, but I do think that that's been a counterproductive way to behave. I mean, look, this book is full of mistakes. This is a guidebook full of things that I would love for you to do better, those of you who read it. So I think I also think that the way to approach people is straightforward, but also as a student, say, listen, you and I, we don't come from the same place, the same background. There's inherently going to be things that we look at differently. Can you please tell me, because I want to be a student of you and of how to communicate best with you. Can you tell me if something I do or say makes you uncomfortable? Can I tell you? Can we agree that we're probably going to have conflicts at somewhere along the line, but that we're a team and we do want to accomplish this goal? I think it's important to talk about time, particularly between countries. People have very different senses of time. A German has a very different sense of time than a Brazilian, than a Filipino, than a Colombian. So that sort of conversation, being as upfront as you can, and also sort of sussing out too. I think, Jake, have these people that you're working with worked with people from other cultures, or are they too potentially going into it thinking, oh, I can just operate in my own cultural context and everything will be fine? I think that's an important thing to know.